Uh-huh.
You are able to see the PDF.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So I have shared the same PDF in the WhatsApp also, so you can download it later. So I mean, this is the overall design of the end-to-end use case what we are planning to implement as part of this training. So first, we will look at it as we look at it as like we are trying to do the configuration for a fictional company called ADN Cosmetics. So just understand that Adobe Campaign, as I mentioned before, is a marketing communication tool, which is predominantly used for sending various types of marketing communications. So there'll be, I mean, so the customers, whoever wants to leverage the Adobe campaign, right? So they will first purchase the Adobe campaign product and they would run through a typical licensing, which usually runs for about 2 to 3 years or which get extended on an annual basis. So when an instance is given to them, when it is, where we call it as provisioning in the sense like right now, if you look at right, so the local instance that is set up in your machine. So you have the campaign server installed on your machine, you have the campaign client installed on your machine, but and you have the Postgres database, everything installed, and we manually did that so that you will have one practice environment for you to play around. But in real world, uh, as an end user or a consultant working for a company, you will only have a campaign client installed on your machine. You will not have anything else. All the underlying setup with regards to the server, the database, and other domain level configuration for sending out the communication, everything is set up or installed directly on the Adobe Marketing Cloud, and you will be provided one server URL and the credentials for you to log in and access that particular server in the database via the Adobe Campaign UI. Okay. So if I give you an example, so my sandbox which I'm accessing. So typically what you are accessing is you also have a connection when here it will just say campaign local dot 8080 slash login or something. Right here, my server is my sandbox is hosted on one of the Adobe Marketing Cloud, and I get a designated URL. I give that URL, and then I need to have a specific operator login or credentials for me to log into the instance. So since I need admin privileges, I use the admin login, and with the admin login, when I give, okay, it says there is a window. Just give you a minute. Let me fix this. I need to fetch the password from the server, and it will take a while. Just give me a minute. There is some issue with my sandbox. Okay, while my sandbox is doing, I'll try to give an illustration with a live customer instance. So if I want to log into any other any instance, right, like as you see on my screen, I mean these are the various folders based on the various customers who I work with. So you can segregate it into the various folders and log in. So I'll just take one of the customer instance and there I'll have a designated credential which I'll be using to log in, and that takes me to the main screen, which looks like a typical. So this is a customized configuration, what you see specific to this particular customer. But when you log into your instance, you won't see all these folders. You'll just see one standard administrator and other folders. But from customers to customer, they segregate everything based on their use case and the line of businesses. And you will have a varied custom configuration as you see on the screen. So now, so when we say Adobe campaign, right? When the customer purchases the Adobe campaign license, so they will not have any base configuration. So they will have the server setup, the database will be installed, and all the standard objects that comes with the installation, which you are seeing in your case when we did the setup. So the customer will be provided with that standard setup and the standard set of tables. So this will not have any data. It will just have the basic structure and add all the tables which the tool needs. So now, what is the end goal of Adobe Campaign? So the end goal of Adobe Campaign is to send out a communication to an end user. Okay, so that end user, we call it as a recipient within the Adobe Campaign ecosystem. So whatever data you're trying to bring into Adobe Campaign, it should be completely centered around recipient. So when you talk about your source system, let's take this Radiant Cosmetics as an example of a customer. So in your source system or in your data warehouse, the customer data warehouse, you would have a huge pool of data. Like you would have details of each and every product, who all bought that product, where in which all retail stores that particular product was sold, what are all the details of the users who purchased the products, what are all the details of the users who have, I mean, what are all the product sales where the user has never provided any details or you didn't capture any of the details. So like with whatever data your source system or your system which is in place for so many years had accumulated or captured, right? So that resides in a bigger data warehouse, and the context of it or the data that is loaded would have been completely different. But now, when it comes to Adobe Campaign, you should bring in only that data which is really needed for you to honor the particular marketing use case. So, like say, for example, I want to target all my users who haven't made a purchase in the last 6 months, but they have made a purchase in the past. So in order to identify that set of users, you need that only the transaction data, whatever the transaction the user made in whatever period you are trying to achieve. So then you would coordinate with the source system who is maintaining the source system, and you will tell them that this is my requirement. I need the details of all my customers who had made the purchases across the past 1 year or 2 years. So then, before you bring that data and load into Adobe Campaign, you need to build the data model within the Adobe Campaign where you are going to store that data. Any questions so far? Hope I am audible, right?
No, no, Sindhu, no questions.
I'm clear, right? I mean, you guys are able to follow, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So moving on. So now we know that like these are the various marketing campaigns which we are planning to send out. For that, I need this so and so data specific to all my customers. And before you talk to the customers, you need to first decide what would be your data model within Adobe Cloud. So now, when we talk about the data model within the Adobe campaign, as I said, everything should be centered around the recipient, which is our main table, and any data what you load should be in relation to the recipient. So recipient, as I said, like is the end user, and to send out an email to the end user, we would need their email address, and to personalize the email, we would need the personalization information like the first name, last name, and other preferences the user has and other details, which eventually you will be using in your email personalization. So this will be your base profile data, which you're going to bring and load into the recipient. So now you also need to fetch all the transactions. So the customer had made in the past, say like one year or 2 years. So now what is the relation or the entity relationship between your recipient and the transaction? So if a recipient is nothing but a end user, so a end user could have made a 0 transaction, could have made a 1 transaction, could have made 2 transactions, 3 transactions, and so on, which implies that the cardinality between the recipient and the transaction is 1 to many, right? So if you traverse it to the entity relationship diagram here, so we are in this particular use case, we are looking at only building or creating 3 tables. One, the recipient table, which is a base user table, and this table already exists in the instance as part of the standard installation. And then we are going to create 2 new tables, which is a transaction table and the household table. So when we look at it, a recipient and a household, like look at it as a household, as a family, or wherein a household can have one recipient record. A recipient is tied to one household, but a particular household can have multiple recipients. Like you have a father, mother, children. So they are all part of one single household. And when you take an individual recipient record, so they are all tied to one household. But when you take up one household, they can have multiple recipients. So this is a entity relationship diagram with which our use case is focused on. Again, as I said, like this is just fictional for a specific use case, just to give an illustration of various types of entity, the relation and everything. And depending on what use case you have with the customer, whatever data you need to honor the particular marketing use cases. So you need to work with your source system to understand what data you have and how do you model it to the recipient. And you need to first work on designing the data model. Once you design the data model, then you work with the source system in bringing that relevant data into Adobe Campaign. Any questions so far?
No, Sundar.
Okay. So now what I have is typically what you usually work with the source system, and you kind of use a data mapping or a mapping between the columns within the source system and the data system. And for that, I will prepare one format which you can leverage the same format when you go to the your actual live project stuff. So here, this document, as I said, like it talks about certain. You can go through this very straightforward, and we are looking at creating 3 tables. One, we are sending an NMS recipient, and we are going to create 2 metadata schemas. And this is the mapping between what are the columns or the data we have in the source system on the source table, and how you are mapping it to the destination. And on the right hand side here, all the standard columns that comes along with the recipient installation are listed out here. So, and you have from your source system, what are the various customer data that is available. And depending on the type of the data, like the first name, last name, email, you already have an existing fields which you're going to reuse. Like for example, the date of birth, first name and last name. So these are the existing fields which were mapped, which you are going to reuse. But when it comes to the completely new fields, like email opt-in, mailing name and all, right? So these you in the existing structure, you don't have a corresponding mapping. So you're going to create a new product. So this mapping sheet helps you to identify what are all the columns which you need to create unique and what are all the columns you're going to reuse. And eventually we'll be reusing the same mapping when we actually get to the step of building the data import workflows, wherein you load the data from a flat file and leverage this mapping to map the data from file onto the table. Likewise, for a household, so this is completely new. So whatever the columns you have in the source file, you'll try to map it, and the source system would be like as I mentioned, it's an exact target. So the data types and everything will be completely different. Whereas the data type that is supported within Adobe Campaign look little differently. Like a varchar is a string in Adobe Campaign and all that because the Adobe Campaign UI level is that. So you map accordingly based on what data type that is there in the source system. Likewise, you have a mapping for alien transaction. Okay, let me upload this mapping sheet as well, so you can go through. Okay, so now the next step is I will go through furthest into the design document when we go deeper. But today's focus will just focus only on the data schema section. Okay, let me see if I can log into my samples. Little so, let's give it a minute. If my sandbox is behaving weird, I'll fix that a little bit. So, to create this data model, right? Like there is this one more PDF which gives a step-by-step instructions on how do you go about building the data schemes. So these are the step-by-step instructions. So essentially, within your sandbox, you will navigate to administration. You're able to see my screen in the PDF, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So you need to navigate administration, configuration, data schema. That is where you'll see all the available schemas. So you'll be clicking on the new icon, which takes you to the new table app option, wherein you choose to create a new table. And we'll start with creating the data schema for the ADN household. I mean the household data schema. So if you look at the data mapping, so this is the ADN household. So here the table name is a household, internal name is a household, and these are the columns. The destination is what you will be creating with the corresponding data type. And so when we look at a namespace, right? So Adobe Campaign, whatever configuration you do, everything in the UI is taken as an XML entity, and the tool uses that XML structure, and based on the definition of the based on the XML structure what you define, it correlates to the corresponding models or the data entities that are applicable within the instance configuration and does the appropriate process. So anything you create within the Adobe campaign, everything follows the XML notation. And I believe everyone understands the basics of the XML about like where you have a root element followed by sub element. I mean the XML attributes and all that. Like hope everyone understand the XML basics.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. So Let me see if it allows me to log in. Great. So now, whenever you log in, right, this is the standard thing what you see. It doesn't have any configuration or anything in the instance, which is what that is there even in my current instance as well. So under you navigate administration configuration, data schema, and that is where you create your data schemas. So uh, whenever we want to create a new table within the Adobe campaign database, the underlying Postgres database, you will have to first build the data structure of the particular table in the XML notation, and you do that under the data schema. If you want to create a new table in the database, you have to first create a new data schema, and that data schema, when you build the structure, so you have an option to reflect the structure back into the table, which is via the toolset one database structure. So only when you do that, whatever the schema structure you defined in the UI, that get reflected into the backend table. So let me first do that with a simple data schema. Okay, so which gives you the holistic view of how do you go about configuring data schema. So as you can see, I navigate to administration, configuration, data schemas. I click on new, which opens up this new editor. So here I'll be choosing the first option, which is to create a new date table in the data template. And here for illustration, I'll just give it some random. So the namespace is like whatever entities you create within the Adobe campaign, right? So you always group them with a particular three character or if maximum 4 character namespace is what we call. So that like if you're working on a specific project, like initialization, like say for example, our customer is a ADN customer. So we just take the first 3 letters ADN and all the configuration we do for the particular customer, we use the namespace as ADN so that which comes, we will know that like whatever the custom configuration we did, everything we can easily find across all the categories using the namespace ADN. And that it also helps, comes in handy when we want to migrate the development what we do into the live instance. So when we say migrate, right, like usually each customer will be provided either 2 or 3 instances. So they will use one instance, which they typically call it as stage for their development as well as UAT. And then the actual live or the prod instance wherein they would like to move only the tested and the validated code. So when you actually do or build all the configuration in your stage, right? So when you want to migrate all the tested configuration, you use the package management or the package migration, wherein you create a package with a list of all the entities you created in the stage instance, and you export that package and import it into your live instance. We'll see that illustration as well when we go step by step. But at this moment, I'm just telling you, like whatever configuration you do in your stage or development instance, you migrate it to the live instance via the package management. Okay. So now namespace is the one which is used to group all the related configuration what we do. So for now, I'll call this namespace as CUS, and I'll just call this data schema name as a test schema. And remember this internal name is the unique identifier for each and every entity what you create within the instance, and this is completely case sensitive. So and the standard practice is whatever internal names you define, it has to follow a camel casing, meaning the first letter should always start with a lowercase and the subsequent words, the first letter should be a capital and rest on a smaller and so on. Like as you can see, the test schema, like the test word is everything in the lowercase. Schema, the first letter S is in capital, followed by the rest of the letters in lowercase. This is a camel case notation. And then the label, you can you like whatever you want to visualize when you see. And again, the label is in plurals, another is in. For now, I'm calling it as a. You want to give any description to the data schema, you can choose. And when you say nest, you get an XML editor wherein you can edit the schema structure. and add all the columns and other attributes. For now, I'll just save it with the default so that my data schema gets created. So as you can see, my test schema is created here. And remember, when you come to the data schemas, you will have a filter on the top which says name or label. So the moment you apply a filter and hit enter, right? Based on the filter, whatever is available, it shows to you. And until unless you clear this filter, you will not be able to see everything. So when you have a filter applied and when you try to create a new schema, you will not see anything listed in the list view. It's because of the filter that you applied. So I'll open up the test schema what I created, and I'll now try to edit it to add more columns. So if you look at this data schema, and down below there are the various tabs, which is the edit screen with the edit tab where we are now, and then the preview tab, which shows you the complete determined XML structure based on the definitions what you do. And then next is the structure, which shows you what is the name of the table and the columns and other things. And then the documentation related to the table. And then the actual data in the table. So when you go to the data, you get an error because we haven't defined or added this schema definition into the database yet. So now whatever configuration you do in the data schema, you do it in the edit tab. And inside the edit tab, so when we just created, this is a base structure wherein source schema is a root element, and inside that the element is what that is a table definition what you do for your data schema or the table. So here our data schema is a test schema, and inside that, if I want to add attributes or the columns, I need to expand the element node. So instead of a for closer with a backslash, I will just expand the element node. This is the standard XML notation of expanding a node. Like I'll use a closing element tag, and inside this, I will have to add all my column data. Once this is saved, so if you see there is this insert menu. So this insert menu gives you an option of attribute is nothing but what type of column you want to create in the table. And if you want to nest additional elements, and if you want to define a link, and if you want to define an enumeration. So we will see that little ahead. For now, I want to create a few columns, like one each data type. So I'll just call it as, so for each and every attribute or a column, you need to define an internal name and the label. So the label I'll call it as string column. I mean the internal name. I'll give it as a string column. Obviously, the data type is a string. And once one attribute is defined, I'll insert one more attribute of type say Boolean. We'll call it as a Boolean column. I'll take one integer. So internal name cannot have any spaces as it's a unique identifier. Label, you are free to use whatever you want to type. Okay, so all I'm doing in my data schema, I have defined 3 new columns. And then once I go to the preview, you can see it elaborates everything. And the string column, by default, the length of any string column is 255. And if you want to override with a custom, so you'll have to come back to the string column and explicitly set what length that particular column is. So if you want to set the length is 100, I'll override, I'll set the length as 100. And now when I come back and do the preview of my data schema build, I can see that the length is now 100. Boolean column and integer column, and it automatically forms few links based on the operator login and other things. And we look at the defining this link. The link is nothing but the cardinality between the tables. And we will get there once we build all the three data schemas which we are looking to build. And if you see the structure now, the table is the schema is a test schema, and then you have a Boolean column, integer column, and a string column. And you are seeing only the labels here. And if you want to view the internal names also of the columns or the attributes what to define, at the extreme right corner, you see some three dots which says a display advanced fields. So when you click on them, then you will be able to see the column along with their internal names and all the internal names for the data schema columns. So they always be prefixed with @ symbol. So, so if you want to access or an XPath of a particular attribute or a field within the entity or XML structure, you always reference it with a @ symbol. Now, this documentation will tell you like what is the actual table name. So the table name is a concatenation of your namespace and the internal name. And as you can see, it's a CUS test schema. And at the database level, it doesn't matter if your table name is a camel case or a mixed case or an uppercase or a lowercase. So that's a SQL. So you can reference any particular table within the SQL, either in a lowercase or a camel case, or I mean, it is case independent. Okay, and these columns are not yet added to the table, and that's why you don't see the column level definition. And when you go to the data, it will still say that no key is defined. So whenever you are defining any particular table, you need to explicitly define a primary key to the table to be able to use or load the data. So Adobe Campaign gives you a default auto primary key, which to add it to that, you need to add an attribute to the element, which you call it as auto pk equal to true. So the moment we add this auto pk equal to true, and when you do a preview, so you can see that this auto pk true also comes up with a primary key sequence or a SQL function which it uses to automatically derive a unique value. So the essence of this auto primary key is like whenever a new record gets inserted into the table, the system will randomly pick up a value and assigns the value to the unique primary key or an ID column. Okay, and that is determined by this a SQL function, which is defined inside the Adobe Campaign database, and Adobe Campaign manages it by itself, and which we call it as a sequence. And it also creates a new column, which is called the internal primary key, and the internal name of that will be ID. And it also creates a unique index and an internal key with that ID column. So the notation for defining a database index is the node DB index, and the notation for defining a key is key, and you need to give an attribute internal equal to true. And what is the XPath of the column for which you are defining the key. So that XPath is nothing but the internal name of the column. And since you are referring it as an XPath, you need to prefer it with the @ symbol for the notation or the pointer to point to this ID column. Okay, and now when you come back and see the structure, so you'll see the data schema, the corresponding columns, and the new column, which is a primary key. And since it's a primary key, you also see it highlighted with a red mark, indicating that this particular column is a primary key on the table. And when you look at the documentation, still this column is not created in the table, so you won't see anything. And the data will still throw an error because the table is not yet created in the database. So now that we have the table structure defined, how do you add this table structure into the database? For that, on the top where you see the various menus, you need to navigate to Tools, Advanced, Update Database Structure. That gives you this wizard. When you click on Nest, it shows you what are all the data schema that are already there in the instance, and for which all there is mismatch between the structure that is there in the database to the structure what you defined in the UI. So here in this case, we have created a new data schema. So it identified that the test schema is newly created, so which needs to be synchronized. And when you click Nest, it will give you the based on the XML structure what to define at a data schema level. it will automatically build a SQL code which it needs to run in the database, wherein it is creating a new table cluster schema with the following columns. It is creating a unique index on the ID column, and it is also inserting a value of 0. This is for creating the links. A 0 record is what whenever a new table is created, one will be created in the table. And it also creating a SQL function for the sequence management of the auto primary key management. So you don't have to do anything, and you just have to click next, and you need to click on the start to do the update progress on the database. So when I click on start, it will apply the SQL queries, and it gives a message saying the updation is completed. And here you will see the progress as 100%, and the start gets the number. So when this happens, it means that your action has been confirmed, and you can come out of it by closing. And since Adobe Campaign is a client server application, and it works on a cached mode, whenever you do a major changes like this, you need to log out and log back into the instance again to be able to see the changes you made are reflected properly or not. So now when I come back to my same data schema, which is a test schema, right? When I go to the preview, remains the same, nothing changes. The structure remains the same, nothing changes. So I don't see the internal names visible. So I click on the right hand side as string corner, the three dots. And now when I see the documentation, I can now see my SQL fields. So I have given only the label and the type. So it automatically picked up based on the data type. It automatically determines the SQL field names, and you can change that within the preview. So within the preview, we'll know what is the SQL column via the SQL name. And if you want to overwrite it under the edit tab, we'll have it. Whatever overwriting you need to do on the standard notation or the identification, you will have to do everything in the edit schema. And documentation is there. And now when you go to the data, you will not get any errors. But since there are no records loaded in the table, you won't see anything. And this is just like a list view of all the columns. To be able to view the data for all the columns, all you have to do is come to this data screen, do a right click, and choose this option configure list, where you get to pull all the columns from the particular XML structure or the schema structure and try to view the data against it. So I'll pull in all the columns, and when I try to say OK, it will try to show me all the available data. Right now, no records are loaded in the table. That's why you don't see it. And when we load the records into the tables, and then all the values against each and every column, you will be able to see. So this is typically how you create a data schema. So now I'll be sharing the step-by-step instructions guide for you. So I want you to use this step-by-step guide. Again, this will not be end-to-end. It will just give you a high-level overview of how to go about doing it. And with my illustration of how do you create a data schema with a simple columns. And with this mapping, so essentially you will be creating a new data schema with a namespace as ADN and interlame as household, and you will be defining all these columns or attributes. Likewise, you will be creating a new data schema, ADN namespace and the transaction, and you will be defining all these columns. And for ADN recipient, so what you will do is under the configuration, instead of creating a new table in the data table, you will be extending the data in the table using an extension schema. And then you will be adding only those columns which are highlighted in yellow, which are not existing. And you will also have to review for the existing columns what is the available data type that is there, and if you need to change it. So, for example, you have a email which is anyway you're leaving it as 128. Again, you have to review and see if you need to change any of the existing column data type to suit the source column data type, or if you're fine to use the existing column as is. Okay, so try creating these three data schemas, two new data tables for household and the transaction, and one existing table by extending the receipt. Okay, you can just play around and try in your local instance, and whatever errors we get, when we connect tomorrow, we will see, and I'll also share a proper final code of how do you go about creating all these three schemas, and I'll also show you again. But before I show that, I want you to try it out from your end to create the schemas from your end, so that way you'll also get a familiarity or understanding of how do you do the things. And when I show you the actual finalized solution, you will be able to grasp or understand it easily. And don't worry about the errors or anything you might face when you start creating this. So use the guide what I have shared and try creating the data schemas. And we will review when we connect tomorrow.
Sure, Sonia. We'll try to create those data schemas.
Yeah, and also I will also try to give you some reference in the data schema. So this is a documentation. Again, you can review this as well, which will help you understand it much better, the underlying concepts.
Okay.
I'll be sharing this to you. So first, let me see what I have already shared. So I'm now sharing the data schema reference. Yes. I'm sharing you the first exercise, exercise 1 of creating the data schemas. And I have shared you the data mapping is already there. The design is already there, schema reference and creating the data schemas. Okay. And all I want you to do before tomorrow's class is try creating 2 new data schemas, which is the ADN household and the ADN transaction. And try extending your existing NMS recipient schema and add the new columns as shown in the map. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Make a note.
Yeah.
Make a note of all the issues or the errors or the doubts you might get while going through, and try to use the reference material that was shared and try doing it. And don't worry if you're not able to do it or if you run into any issues. The whole purpose is for only when you practice and when you try yourself, you'll understand the concept better. From my end, I could have clearly, like how I showed, I could have given you the XML structure for all the columns. This is how you do it. This is a data schema, and I can create a package and give it to you. And you will also have a package in your local. But before we do that, I want you to first try and explore and try creating the data schema by yourself, so that you'll understand the concept better when I actually share you the working solution. Is it clear?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So any other questions? Okay, then so we'll end the session here today and we'll resume again tomorrow, and we'll start with what all you did based on the exercise which I did, and we'll take it from there. Okay. And the design document, what I shared, that will encapsulate or give you an overview of what we are going to do as part of this night. Okay. And for everything, you will have that as a step by step exercise, and at the same time, I will demonstrate and show it to you on my screen. And once demonstrated, the actual working solution, I'll package it and import into your local, so that whatever configuration that is done on my side will be available on your end as well. Okay, but before we get there, I'll do some exercise for you to clear out, and then the same exercise I will show you how it is actually done, and we will replace it in the version 1. Okay. Is it clear?
Yes, Sonia.
Yeah, okay.
Okay then. So we'll regroup again tomorrow at the same time. And yeah,